Good morning. So last week we talked about transitional loss, and that was our focus for Fierce Wind Wildfire, was talking about transitional loss. And our conversations really rallied around how frequent this can happen in the military and what that looks like. And Harmony did a video on it, and I did a blog. And this week we are switching roles, and I'm doing a video on permanent loss, and Sweet Harmony just did a blog on permanent loss, and she's suffered a lot of permanent loss. So I hope you'll take the time to read her blog. It's very empowering and encouraging. But today I want to talk to you a little bit about permanent loss. And so it's my tendency to just research things before I speak on them. And one of the things I wanted to say is just what the word permanent means. And so the word permanent is lasting or intended to last or remain unchanged indefinitely. So I'm going to read that one more time. Permanent means lasting or intended to last or remain unchanged indefinitely. So first I want to challenge our thinking a little bit on what permanent loss looks like. If permanent loss is something lasting or intended to last, remaining unchanged forever, do we ever suffer that, I guess, as believers? Do we ever really truly suffer permanent loss? And feel free to answer that question. So I wanted to talk to you about some different ways that I've endured some loss over the years. So when I was a young gal, I did lose, and probably in my teenage years, I lost my granddad and my grandmother and my great uncle all in the same year for medical reasons. My great uncle was a lot like a granddad to us, just a really, really good man. And so I had endured what this thing called loss looked like and how to process that as a young girl. But I hadn't really faced it in my adult life. I did suffer a divorce. I've been married now to my husband for 10 years. So prior to that, I had been married 3.5 years. And while that person is still alive today, it was permanent loss. It did feel like permanent loss because I've never been in contact with that individual again. And yet I was married to him for 3.5 years. And then I have also endured a miscarriage. Suffered a miscarriage, and that was within the last year or so. So I have experienced loss, but what I want to talk to you about today is this idea of temporary and permanent loss. So when Ben joined the military, he was temporarily disqualified for a medical condition that they thought he had, this keratoconus, an eye disease that they thought he had, that he did not have. And so he went to doctor after doctor. The doctor that diagnosed him at MEPS misdiagnosed him. He went to doctor after doctor after doctor that kept telling him he had this eye disease, but all the while he had 20/15 vision. He had very stable corneas. It made no sense why they kept coming to this conclusion. And so eventually he went to a doctor that said, no, this isn't a temporary disqualification. So for medical purposes, a temporary disqualification would be like, oh, I have a broken finger and it will heal. And once it heals, then I can join or whatnot. That might be a horrible example, but basically it's something that's going to be fixed. A permanent disqualification, it's not apt to change, basically. And so they thought he had this eye disease that was not apt to change. So luckily we finally were able to go to like a legitimate eye doctor that said absolutely he does not have this. And so then we had to get what's called a medical waiver for him to enlist. And during this whole time, I've been praying, we had been packing boxes. I had already lost a job that I had had for about 8 years. And we're packing boxes, and I just feel just such uncertainty. And I know my husband did too, but we had both felt confident that he had already auditioned for the job and got it. In the band, it's done a little bit differently. You have to audition first. But anyway, he had auditioned for the role and got it, and then just had to go through basic training, but he couldn't get through this little loop of the process. And so anyhow, long story short, he had to get this medical waiver to prove that a good doctor had said, no, this is not true. And it isn't true. He doesn't have that disease. But it took us years to be able to prove that. And so I think with the Lord, that's the season that we're in. When we've suffered permanent loss, which seems like this unchanging thing that will never shift, the Lord is our medical waiver that says, nope, I'm going to go and fight on your behalf, which is the message he conveyed to me when Ben was going through all that enlisting. No, I'm going to go and fight on your behalf. You need only be still. And so I think it's important that we just recognize that the Lord He is our medical waiver. He, by dying on the cross, is saying, nope, I'm giving you a choice at life. Not just life here on this earth, but life everlasting. And so I guess I just wanted to encourage us today. I have a friend that has suffered the loss of his child. That same friend has a adult son that suffered the loss of his brother. His wife suffered the loss of her son. And it was just a brutal thing to watch and experience, because this was just a lovely, good, godly family. And why would God allow this? And it sounds terrible, but I think we're more willing to embrace death when it's to somebody horrible. That sounds so awful. But if someone's on death row for something awful that they've done, it's easier for us to embrace that. And really, it shouldn't be. If we really think about that, there should be no person that we are ever happy about dying. Even if they've done this god-awful thing, eternal damnation is really what's in store for that individual. And that should never make us feel better. I mean, that should draw us to a different, holier, stronger, intentional living than anything. So anyhow, this friend had lost his boy, and I remember just thinking, God, why would you allow these good people to endure this? Like, I can't even, it's too painful. Why would you allow it? But I remember going to this young man's funeral, and there had to have been about 4,000 people there. But I'm telling you, that funeral was the most holy experience, one of the most holy experiences I've ever been a part of. And I believe firmly that not only is that boy in heaven today, but I believe hundreds will be in heaven because of that boy's funeral. And so while I don't understand the purposes of God, and while I don't understand the intent of God and the why, I just trust His goodness. I trust that He is good, and He has a reason, and He has a plan. But the part of permanent loss where I really struggle, that I'd kind of like your feedback. So if I firmly believe that the power of life is through the power of the cross, if I firmly believe that, then what happens for those that have suffered death with a non-believing person? And so I would love your input on that. How have you found hope in Christ in those times? What has been your experience? How have you handled that? And then also, I just really wanted to encourage us that even in life on this earth, the Bible's pretty clear that it's in laying down of our life that we gain. We gain life by losing our own lives, right? By our recognition that it's not about us, right? It's about God, and it's about everyone, but it really isn't about us. Our life is a blessing. We get the very breath that we breathe is a blessing, but it's a blessing to be used to bless others. It shouldn't be this selfish thing. And so it's in the laying down of our lives that we really gain life. And I believe that's the same thing in the permanence of death, is that the laying down of life, the blessing comes in doing that. So, but I would love your feedback. I'd like to know your experiences on permanent loss, how you've endured it, how you've handled it. I'd like to know your experience on permanent loss as a believer and as an unbeliever. And as an unbeliever, do you listen to a video message like this and just think it's utter nonsense? Because for us that believe in the Lord, that is the hope. That is the hope of Christ, is that he would send His Son to die for us so that we all may live. That is the hope of Christ. And so I guess this holiday season, I just want to encourage you that there is hope, and it is in Him.